All right, looking at Allegory of the Cave, this is a very, very important essay to go over because it, the way that it's structured, the way that Plato sets up his argument, the way that, and not only that, the images and the metaphors that Plato uses are very, very important and very necessary for a lot of Western thinking and Western ideology. And basically what you have, if you've read the reading, you can look up, there's a ton of stuff online to look up as far as understanding. There's a lot of pictures depicting the image of the cave and the captives and all that. So I don't think that I need to really go through and explain all of that because there are enough resources online to for you guys to see that yourself. Just notice that Plato sets up the I don't know, the battle or the relationship between the light and the dark, and the idea that I use Plato to lead into Jefferson and as well as King because they all share some common ideas and themes, and one of the biggest things that I want you guys to look at and to recognize is that they all three look to a higher power or a supreme being or a divine spirit, something that would be considered godlike or a god. Obviously, Martin Luther King Jr. was a Christian. Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian per se, but he did believe in a creator God, a God of nature, and Plato believed in some kind of divine spirit that was even beyond his explanation. So, it's important to recognize those things because ultimately, how do you explain the basic rights of man? How do you explain racial equality? How do you explain enlightenment without explaining or without, attaching that to some kind of idea of a higher power? And again, I'm not talking about the Christian God specifically or Buddha or any particular religious figure. It's just that, which obviously, like I said, like King was a Christian, so he believed in the Christian God. But the idea that some things are just necessary, with Jefferson, he was kind of very forceful with his argument and saying that, the things that the rights that men should have are self-evident. What is self? I mean, it just means it's just so obvious. They're given to man by God. Or there is something higher than man that makes these laws. It creates these laws. It creates the basic rights and freedoms and things that are necessary to be a free and whole or complete human being that are just beyond explanation. And we see Martin Luther King says the same thing in his letter to Birmingham, or in letter from Birmingham jail. One of the things that Martin Luther King does, though, and a lot of the reason that he came under a lot of fire for what he said or how he said things were the argument styles, the argumentative styles that he used, because ultimately the same arguments that Martin Luther King used could have been used by someone that had a negative, message. We look back now, we know that Martin Luther King was correct in saying and doing the things that he did, but the arguments that he did use, he said that they were not bound by the laws of man. Injustice here is the same as injustice anywhere, and when you have someone that has a large following, a large group of people following them and believing what they say or what he or she says, and that person states that they aren't responsible to uphold man-made laws if they're unjust. Well, who dictates what a just or unjust man-made law is? They hold themselves to God's law. Well, what is God's law and where is it written? Again, we look back on history and we see that, of course, he was right. But that argumentative style doesn't always work. Or it does work, but sometimes it just works for people that lead a cult, and they're going to get you to dress up in white sheets and, white Keds tennis shoes and drink some laced Kool-Aid. Those people also thought that their message was from God. So, looking back, obviously his heart was in the right place, and he did do the right things. But that type of argumentative style that is a dangerous one, and it's very volatile, and put in the wrong hands can be used, for the wrong thing. Now, another thing about these guys is Martin Luther King and Plato. They have a very, let me restate this. Martin Luther King doesn't sympathize with the whites, really. I mean, he does, but he understands their predicament. If you look at Plato, and he says the guy that gets released from the shadows, or the guy that gets released from the caves, and he's used to seeing shadows, which are lies. He's used to seeing lies his entire life. That's all he knows. Well, once he finally sees the light, and he goes back to try to free the prisoners that have seen shadows their entire lives as well, and all they know is the lie, which is the shadow. The people that are used to seeing the shadows, they're going to kill the guy bringing the light, which the guy bringing the light is the carrier of the light. And again, that reference, which again plays out all throughout history, humanity. I mean, what did Jesus Christ say he was? Jesus Christ said he was the way, the truth, and the light, right? The idea of the person carrying the enlightenment, the person carrying the light, bringing it to those in the dark, gets killed because he's unaccepted, because his message is ultimately, judged by those living in shadows as wrong. Because, how do you, again, they obviously seem like the crazy one because everyone else sees the shadows and thinks the shadows is reality, but you've got one person that says the shadows are lies. Well, Martin Luther King kind of goes down that same road. How do you, addressing racism and racists in the South, how do you expect, just because one person realizes that racism is wrong and unjust and cruel and inhumane, doesn't mean that a person that spent their entire life, a 50, 60-year-old man or woman that has been raised believing in racial inequality, that skin color does matter. How can you convince them that it doesn't matter in one conversation, through one protest, through one bill, through one law? You can't. It's a gradual process. It's a gradual process of enlightenment, just like the slave that was let loose from the cave, and he gradually had to adjust his eyes to the sun so he could gradually take in what the sun had to offer, which is reality, which is the truth. The sun always represents the truth. The light is always representative of the truth, and darkness and shadows is representative of a lie, an evil. So, Martin Luther King understood those things. He knew those things. He knew that kind of immediate transformation couldn't happen simply because that's not the human condition. Our brains don't work that way, plain and simple. And that's all there is. You cannot flip a switch in someone's brain once they have been taught their entire lives that A is B, when in reality A is A, but they don't know that, right? You can't convince them of that. It is a gradual process of enlightenment, a gradual process of education, a gradual process of learning and acceptance, and accepting the light. Because, again, just like we saw with and the allegory of the cave, the light hurts his eyes, right? Using those muscles, crawling out, all that hurts because they've never been used before. Not used to it and never been... never been used. So that process of enlightenment and understanding is painful. It's painful to change. It's painful to accept things that you were taught your entire life were not true, were a lie. And many people refuse to accept it. I mean, that's why they say that ignorance is bliss. It's much easier to live in denial and live in ignorance than it is to actually do something about it or to change. And again, that is one thing that holds throughout these essays, and the other is the idea that the idea of a higher power of some sort. Again, not advocating a God one way or the other. I mean, I'm not preaching to you guys. I'm just saying that these guys that had it, the common thing was that there is something in the universe. There is a higher power than us that mandates that certain rights and necessities and equalities and the idea that Plato says there's some kind of divine spirit that descends upon people that allows some to be enlightened and some not to be enlightened. And for one of the greatest philosophers of all time, that's kind of a strange thing. It seems to me to be kind of a strange thing to say. Like, well, how do you explain some people becoming enlightened and seeing the light, and then some not? I don't know. Just some divine spirit that just kind of comes down upon you, and really, that's what else is there to say? What other explanation is there? Would be, these three guys wrote these essays. That would be their argument. That would be their question to you. So I hope this helps out a little bit, trying to tie the three of these essays together. I'm going to post this as soon as I can.